Millionaire finds this blind girl digging a hole in the ground. 5 minutes later, what they find in the hole will shock you. Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The light April rain turned the cobblestones of Savannah's historic streets into a dark mirror, reflecting the century-old facades. Harrison Vanderbilt walked with measured steps, his dark wool coat protecting him from the persistent drizzle that had begun before dawn. At 52, his graying temples contrasted with his still penetrating eyes, marked by wrinkles that spoke more of bitterness than smiles. The narrow streets of the historic district echoed only the sound of his leather shoes against the wet stones. Harrison preferred these silent mornings when he could walk without the forced greetings of merchants or the curious glances of residents. His fortune, built over decades of precious stone mining, was known to all, but it also isolated him like an invisible barrier. It was while passing by River Street that something unusual caught his attention. In the abandoned backyard of an old Victorian house whose peeling blue-painted wooden windows testified to better times, a small figure moved with determination. Harrison stopped, frowning. A girl of about 6 years old was kneeling in the damp earth, digging a hole with a rusty spoon. Her simple clothes, a patched floral dress and a knitted cardigan, were soaked by the rain. Brown hair stuck to her small face, and her tiny hands were covered in mud up to the wrists. What impressed Harrison the most was the child's silent determination. She didn't whine or complain about the cold. She simply dug with precise and constant movements, as if her life depended on it. From time to time, she stopped to feel the earth with her fingers, exploring every inch with an attention that seemed disproportionate to her age. "Girl!" Harrison called, approaching the low iron gate. His voice sounded harsher than he intended. "What are you doing there?" The child raised her head, and it was then that he realized her eyes, large and expressive, did not focus on him. She turned her face towards his voice, but her gaze remained vague, lost in some point beyond him. "I'm looking," she replied, her voice small but firm. "My mum buried something very important here before she left." "Left where?" Harrison pushed the gate, which creaked on its rusty hinges. The girl showed no fear, just tilted her head as if she were measuring his intentions by the tone of his voice. "To the hospital." The words came out in a whisper full of worry. "She said she buried something that can help her get better. I need to find it before it's too late." Harrison felt something strange stir in his chest, a long, dormant sensation that he couldn't name. He watched the girl resume her task, the spoon scraping against stones and roots. The rain continued to fall, turning the earth into mud that stuck to everything. "What's your name?" "Iris," she replied without stopping digging. "Iris Santana, and yours?" "Harrison." He hesitated before adding, "Vanderbilt." If the last name meant anything to her, she didn't show it. She continued digging with a concentration that bordered on obsession. "How long have you been here?" "Since the sun came up." Iris wiped her nose on the cuff of her cardigan. "Mom always said that important things are easier to find when the ground is wet." Harrison looked around. The abandoned backyard was full of tall weeds and debris. The Victorian house, probably built in the late 1800s, showed signs of recent abandonment. Windows closed but not broken. Walls that still maintained their original color in some places. "Did your mom live here?" "No." Iris stopped digging. For a moment, her little hands trembling slightly. "But she came here sometimes, when she thought I was asleep. I heard her footsteps in the backyard, the sound of the earth being dug. She thought I didn't know, but I always knew." The explanation intrigued Harrison. How could a blind child be so sure about movements that she had only heard? "And you remember exactly where she was digging?" "I remember everything." The answer came with a simplicity that carried weight. I remember the sound of her footsteps on the loose stones near the guava tree. I remember the different noise the earth made when she dug. I even remember the smell that came from the hole. Harrison moved closer. The girl had managed to dig a hole almost 1.5 feet deep, impressive for someone her size using only a spoon. What smell? Of old things, of wet paper, of metal. Iris sniffed, trying to hold back the tears that were starting to form. Please, Mr. Vanderbilt, can you help me? My hands are getting really sore and I need to find it before... She couldn't finish the sentence. The tears finally ran down her mud-covered cheeks, mixing with the rain that continued to fall. Harrison stood still for long seconds, watching that determined child digging in the mud in search of something that could save her mother. Something in that scene touched him in a way that he hadn't experienced in years. Maybe it was Iris's silent determination, or the way she didn't ask for compassion, just practical help. Or maybe it was simply the fact that, after so long living isolated in his bitterness, finding someone fighting so desperately for love made him remember when he himself had once loved like that. "All right," he said finally. "I'll help you." Iris stopped digging and turned her face to him, a small but genuine smile illuminating her features. And for the first time in years, Harrison Vanderbilt felt he had done something truly important. The next day, Harrison returned to the abandoned backyard, carrying a small gardening spade and a flashlight. The rain had stopped during the night, but the earth was still damp and easy to dig. He found Iris exactly where he had left her, sitting, next to the hole they had started, her small hands wrapped in pieces of cloth that she herself had improvised as bandages. "I knew you would come back," she said when she heard his footsteps approaching. "I recognized the sound of your shoes on the stones." Harrison was surprised by the girl's auditory accuracy, but did not comment. He knelt next to the hole and began to dig with the spade, removing layers of earth much more efficiently than the rusty spoon. "Tell me about your mom," he said as he worked. "Minerva, right?" "Yes." Iris's face lit up when she spoke of her mother. "She's a seamstress. Makes the prettiest dresses in Savannah for the festivals. Works all day, and sometimes all night too, embroidering little flowers and stars that I can feel with my fingers." "And she's been sick for a long time?" Iris's expression darkened. "It started a few months ago. First it was just a cough that wouldn't go away. Then she started getting really tired, even without working much. In the last week she fainted twice." Harrison continued digging, absorbing the information. "And what about your father?" "I don't have a father." The answer came quickly and dryly, as if it were a question she had answered many times. "Mom says he had to travel very far away before I was born and never came back." Something in the way Iris spoke suggested that there was more to this story, but Harrison didn't insist. The spade hit something solid, making a noise different from the impact against stones. "I think we've found something," he said, digging more carefully around the object. Iris leaned forward, her little hands outstretched. "Can I touch it?" Harrison guided her hands to the partially unearthed object. It was something wrapped in thick plastic, about the size of a shoebox. "That's it!" exclaimed Iris, her voice trembling with emotion. "I smell the plastic that Mom used to protect the fabrics from the rain." They carefully removed the package from the earth. Harrison noticed that it was very well sealed, with no signs of internal moisture. Minerva had taken special care to protect whatever was inside. "Can we open it?" asked Iris, her hands exploring the surface of the package. "Of course." Inside, the plastic was a simple but well-preserved wooden box. Harrison opened it slowly. The first item he saw was a handmade rag doll with a calico dress and brown wool hair. Iris immediately recognized it by touch. "Maria doll," she said, hugging the toy to her chest. Mom made it for me when I was little. I thought I had lost it, but there were more things in the box. Old photographs, some yellowed letters, and a small velvet pouch that made a characteristic noise when shaken. Harrison picked up one of the photographs. It showed a young and beautiful woman holding a baby in front of a house he didn't recognize. He turned the photo over. Minerva and Iris, Atlanta, 2018, was written in delicate handwriting. "Iris," he said carefully, "were you born in Atlanta?" The girl stopped hugging the doll. "I don't know. Mom never talked about before we got to Savannah. She just said we had to forget the past and look forward." Harrison opened the velvet pouch. Inside, there were several small stones, and even without being an expert, he could identify rose quartz and some good-quality amethysts. Nothing extraordinarily valuable, but certainly not common stones that someone would find by chance. "Where did your mom get these stones?" he asked, holding an amethyst against the light. "I don't know, but sometimes she would look at little stones with a small magnifying glass. She said she was evaluating something, but I never understood what it meant." Harrison frowned. Did Minerva know how to assess precious stones? That would explain how a seamstress could support her daughter working only with sewing in a small town. Among the letters, he found one that was not sealed. The handwriting was different from what he had seen in a photograph, more masculine, more hurried. "Minerva," he read in a low voice. "I know you don't want to see me, but you need to know that I have discovered things that put us in danger. The stones you have been evaluating are not of legal origin. The men you work for are involved in serious things. Take Iris and get out of town. I'll try to fix this, but if something happens to me, use what you buried as protection. Signed, R." The silence that followed was heavy. Iris had stopped playing with the doll and remained still, as if she could feel the tension in the air. "Mr. Vanderbilt," she said finally, "the letter talks about my father, doesn't it?" Harrison folded the letter carefully. "Maybe. He didn't go traveling, did he?" Her voice was small but firm. "Something bad happened to him." Harrison didn't know what to answer. There were more letters in the box, more photographs, and he had the feeling that each revealed item would make the situation more complicated. "Iris," he said finally, "I need to meet your mom. I need to talk to her. She's at St. Vincent's Hospital." Iris wiped her nose on the cuff of her cardigan. "But the doctors say she needs a very expensive surgery, and we don't have any money." "How much does it cost?" $50,000. The number came out as a desperate whisper. Mom cried when she found out, said it was more money than she would earn in her whole life. Harrison was quiet, processing everything he had discovered. A seamstress who secretly evaluated precious stones, a man who had disappeared after discovering illegal activities, a blind child desperately looking for answers buried in the earth. "Are there more things buried here?" he asked. Iris nodded. "Mom came here several times, always in different places in the backyard. I can hear where the earth has been moved." Looking at the girl, who was holding the rag doll as if it were the most precious thing in the world, while her blind eyes fixed a distant point full of worry, Harrison made a decision that would change both of their lives. "Then let's keep digging," he said, already picking up the spade again. "And then we'll visit your mom at the hospital." But as he dug, a question hammered in his mind. Who was R, and what exactly had Minerva gotten involved in that was dangerous enough for someone to disappear? St. Vincent's Hospital was located in the highest part of Savannah, its windows offering a panoramic view of the historic city. Harrison parked his discreet car in front of the building, watching Iris settle into the passenger seat. During the drive, she had remained quiet, holding the rag doll tightly against her chest. "Are you nervous?" he asked. "I always get nervous when I come to visit Mom," Iris admitted. "She tries to pretend she's okay, but I can hear in her voice that she's in pain." They entered the hospital, And Harrison immediately noticed how the staff treated Iris. They knew her well. She was a frequent visitor. A middle-aged nurse with grey hair tied in a tight bun approached. "Hi, Iris dear. Your mum is waiting for you." The woman looked curiously at Harrison. "And who is your companion?" "This is Mr. Harrison," said Iris. "He's helping me look for Mum's things." The nurse, whose badge identified her as Lords, extended her hand to Harrison. "Nice to meet you. I've been taking care of Minerva for a few weeks. She's a very brave woman." "How is she doing?" asked Harrison as they walked through the corridors that smelled of disinfectant. "Stable, but urgently needing surgery. The lung problem is progressing rapidly." Lords lowered her voice. "Between us, if she doesn't have surgery in the next 2 weeks, it may be too late." Iris squeezed the doll tighter, and Harrison noticed how the nurse's words affected her. Room 312 was small and simple, with 2 beds separated by a curtain. Minerva Santana was in the bed near the window, and Harrison was surprised by her appearance. He expected to find a woman weakened by illness, but Minerva, despite being thin and pale, maintained a dignified posture. Her brown eyes were intelligent and observant, and when she saw Harrison, an expression of immediate caution crossed her face. "Mom!" Iris ran to the bed, and Minerva hugged her carefully, trying not to show the effort the movement cost her. "My little one, how did you get here?" "Mr. Harrison brought me." Iris turned towards him. "He's helping me find the things you buried." Minerva's reaction was immediate and alarming. Her face paled even further, and she looked at Harrison with a mixture of fear and despair. "What things?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm so as not to scare her daughter. "We found Maria doll and some pretty little stones," Iris said innocently, "and some pictures of you from when we were little." Minerva closed her eyes for a moment, clearly trying to control her emotions. When she opened them again, she fixed them on Harrison. "Mr. Vanderbilt, Harrison Vanderbilt." The recognition was instantaneous. Minerva knew the name. Everyone in Savannah knew the mining millionaire. But there was something more in her expression, as if she knew exactly who he was for reasons that went beyond his public reputation. "I need to talk to you, alone." Her voice was firm, but Harrison could perceive the tremor of tension. "Iris, how about going for a soda at the diner with Nurse Lords?" he suggested. "Your mum and I need to talk about grown-up things." "Can I take Maria doll?" "Of course," said Minerva, kissing her daughter's forehead. "But don't wander off too far, okay?" After Iris left, accompanied by the nurse, Minerva settled in bed and faced Harrison directly. "You know who I am, don't you?" she said. "I know you're not just a seamstress," Harrison replied, pulling a chair closer to the bed. "And I know you assess precious stones." Minerva sighed deeply. 5 years ago, when I arrived in Savannah, I thought I had left everything behind, that Iris and I could start a new and simple life. Fleeing from Atlanta, fleeing from much more than that. She looked out the window, watching the mountains in the distance. "My husband, Rodrigo, discovered an illegal mining scheme that involved powerful people. He was a geologist, working evaluating land for a mining company." Harrison leaned forward. The letter signed with R was from him. "The last one I received before." Minerva stopped, struggling to maintain her composure. "Before he disappeared, the police said it was probably an accident, that he fell into one of the mines he was inspecting, but I knew it wasn't true." "Why not?" "Because the night before, he told me about documents he had found. Falsified certificates of origin, forged environmental impact reports, hidden bank accounts. He said he was going to report everything the next day." Harrison felt a discomfort growing in his stomach. "What company was it?" "Valley Stones Mining." Minerva watched him carefully. "A subsidiary of your company." Harrison's world seemed to spin. Valley Stones was one of his outsourced companies, which he had hired years ago to explore smaller plots. He had trusted the local management, making only periodic supervisions. "Minerva," he said slowly, "I swear I didn't know anything about this." "I know." Her answer surprised him. "During these years, I watched you from afar. I saw how you treat your employees, how you get involved with the community. If you knew about the scheme, you would have done something. Then why did you hide this information all these years?" "Because I was afraid." Tears finally began to run down Minerva's face. "And because after Rodrigo disappeared, I found out I was pregnant. Iris was born prematurely, with vision problems. The doctor said it might be genetic, but I always suspected it had to do with the stress, with everything I went through." Harrison felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. "Iris lost her sight because of this?" "Not completely. She was born with low vision, but at the age of 2, after an infection that we couldn't treat properly because we didn't have money, she became completely blind." The silence that followed was heavy with guilt and regret. Harrison looked at his hands, realizing that somehow his negligence had contributed to the suffering of this family. "Why did you decide to tell me everything now?" "Because I'm dying," said Minerva with devastating simplicity. "And because Iris needs someone to take care of her when I'm no longer here. When I saw her trusting you today, it was the first time in years that she wasn't afraid of a stranger." "You're not going to die," said Harrison firmly. "I'm going to pay for the surgery." "With what right?" The question came loaded with pain, but not anger. "We don't want charity." "It's not charity, it's responsibility." Harrison got up, walking to the window. "If my company was involved in your husband's death, if it contributed to Iris's problems, then I owe you a debt. And after the surgery, are you going to disappear and go back to your millionaire life, leaving a 6-year-old girl with the memory that for a moment she had hope?" The question hit Harrison like a slap in the face. He turned to face Minerva, and for the first time in years, he didn't know what to answer. At that moment they heard laughter in the hallway. Iris was coming back, talking animatedly with Nurse Lourdes about the soda flavors at the diner. "Think carefully about what you're offering to do, Mr. Vanderbilt," said Minerva softly. "Because once you enter her life for real, you can't just leave when you get tired of playing hero." 2 weeks had passed since the conversation in the hospital. Harrison had arranged for the payment of Minerva's surgery, but her words continued to echo in his mind. Every day, he returned to the abandoned backyard with Iris, and with each excavation, they discovered more evidence of the Santana family's hidden past. On that May morning, the sun had finally broken through the clouds that had covered Savannah for days. Iris was sitting in the shade of the guava tree, methodically organizing the objects they had found. Her ability to memorize each item by touch constantly impressed Harrison. "Mr. Harrison," she said, holding up a small pink stone, "this one is different from the others. It's smoother and has a strange weight." Harrison approached and examined the stone. It was a rose quartz of exceptional quality, professionally cut. It wasn't something someone would find casually. "Where exactly did we find this?" "In the hole near the back fence, along with those papers that you said were important." The papers Iris was referring to were certificates of precious stone evaluation, all signed by Minerva. Harrison had been shocked to discover that she not only knew how to evaluate gems, but had official certification for it. "Iris," he said, carefully, "has your mom ever talked about how she learned to evaluate stones?" "Not much. She just said Dad taught her before he left." Iris ran her fingers over the smooth surface of the stone. "But sometimes, when she thought I was asleep, I heard her talking on the phone about lots and provenances." "Who was she talking to?" "I don't know, but she always got nervous after those calls." Harrison frowned. During his discreet investigations into Valley Stones mining, he had discovered irregularities that disturbed him deeply. The outsourced company he had hired was involved in much more than he imagined. "Let's keep digging near the back wall," he suggested. "Your mum mentioned that there were more things buried." While digging, Iris suddenly stopped and tilted her head, as she always did when she heard something important. "Someone's coming," she whispered. "Heavy footsteps, 2 men." Harrison looked towards the gate. 2 men in dark suits approached, their expressions serious and determined. He didn't recognize them, but something in their posture alerted him to danger. "Iris, go hide behind the guava tree," he said softly, "and don't make a sound." "Mr. Vanderbilt," one of the men called, pushing the gate without ceremony. "We need to talk." "About what?" Harrison stood up, positioning himself between the men and where Iris was hidden. "About your sudden friendship with the Santana family." The taller man, with grey hair and a scar on his chin, smiled unpleasantly. "My name is Cardoso. I work for people who have interests in the region." "What kind of interests?" "The kind that doesn't like curious people digging in places they shouldn't." The second man, shorter and fatter, pointed to the holes in the backyard. "We know you've found things that don't belong to you." Harrison felt his blood run cold. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do." Cardoso moved closer. "Minerva Santana was working for us before she got sick, evaluating certain stones that, let's say, needed proper documentation. The piece of the puzzle fell into place in Harrison's mind. Minerva wasn't just evaluating stones. She was being used to legitimize illegally mined gems." "She didn't know what she was doing," he said. "Yes, she did. And very well." The fat man laughed. "Until her husband started asking too many questions. Poor Rodrigo, too curious for his own good." The mention of Iris's father made Harrison clench his fists. "What did you do to him?" "Nothing he didn't deserve." Cardoso examined his nails with indifference. "But we're not here to talk about the past. We're here because you found documents that belong to us." "We don't have anything that belongs to you." "Yes, you do. And we know because Minerva herself told us." Cardoso's smile became more cruel. "Last night at the hospital, she was very cooperative when we explained the situation." Harrison's heart raced. "You went to the hospital?" "Of course. A woman in her situation. Well, she understands the importance of collaborating." The fat man moved dangerously closer. "She told us she buried compromising documents here." "Documents that could cause problems for many important people, including you," added Cardoso. "Your company is more involved in this than you imagine. If those documents reach the authorities, Mr. Vanderbilt could lose much more than money." Harrison felt the world spinning around him. "Minerva is okay? For now." The answer came loaded with threat. "But accidents can happen in hospitals. Equipment can fail. Medications can be switched." It was a clear threat. Harrison looked discreetly to where Iris was hidden, praying that she would remain quiet. "What do you want?" "Simple. All the documents, photographs, and evidence you found here, and your word that this will never be mentioned again." "And if I refuse?" "Then the girl will be orphaned very quickly." Cardoso checked his watch. "And maybe she'll need a new guardian too. Accidents can happen to anyone." At that moment, Iris made an almost imperceptible noise behind the tree. Cardoso looked in the direction of the sound. "The girl is here?" he asked, starting to move towards the guava tree. "No," lied Harrison, desperate. "She's at the hospital with her mother." "Liar." The fat man also moved towards the tree. "We heard her talking when we arrived." Harrison placed himself in their way. "Leave her out of this. She's just a child." "A child who heard too much," said Cardoso coldly. "And blind children can have accidents so easily." It was then that Iris came out from behind the tree, holding something in her small hands. "Don't hurt him," she said. her voice small but firm. "I know where the documents you want are." The two men stopped, surprised by the girl's courage. "Iris, no," said Harrison, but she shook her head. "I know where Mom hid the important things, the ones she said she could never let anyone find." She raised the object in her hands. It was a small key. "But if you hurt Mr. Harrison or my mom, I'll throw this key into the well in the back and you'll never find anything." Cardoso and his henchmen exchanged glances, clearly not expecting resistance from a 6-year-old child. "What key is that, girl?" "The key to the place where Mom hid the real things." Iris held the key tighter. "The things you're really looking for aren't buried here. They're somewhere else, and only I know where." The silence that followed was tense and dangerous. Harrison could see that the men were re-evaluating the situation. "All right, smart girl," said Cardoso finally. "Where is this place?" Iris smiled, a smile that didn't reach her blind eyes. "First, you're going to promise that you won't hurt anyone." "Iris," began Harrison, worried about the dangerous game she was playing. "Trust me, Mr. Harrison," she said softly. "I hear a lot more than people think, and I know a lot more than I seem to." It was then that Harrison realized that he had completely underestimated the intelligence and courage of the girl he had promised to protect. Cardoso and his henchmen followed Iris and Harrison through the narrow streets of Savannah, maintaining a menacing distance, but not wanting to draw the attention of local residents. Iris walked with a confidence that surprised Harrison. She knew every cobblestone, every curve of the path, navigating the city with a precision that only an exceptional memory could provide. "Where are we going?" asked Harrison softly. "To St. Francis Church," replied Iris without hesitation. "Mom always said that the most important secrets should stay in the most sacred place." They climbed the steep slope that led to the old colonial church. Iris stopped in front of the wrought iron gate, her small hands exploring the lock until she found the perfect fit for the key she carried. "How did you know the key was for this church?" asked Cardoso, suspicious. "Because I hear everything," said Iris simply. "For years, I've heard Mom leaving the house on Thursday mornings, always at the same time, always with the same steps. And I always heard the sound of this specific key. It creaks in a way that's different from all the others." The gate opened with a loud creak, echoing in the almost empty square. Iris led the group inside the church, their footsteps echoing, in the sacred environment illuminated only by the filtered light of the stained glass windows. "Where exactly?" asked the fat man, his voice strangely low in the religious environment. Iris walked to the side altar dedicated to Our Lady of Sorrows. Behind the image, there was a small wooden door that most visitors wouldn't even notice. "Here," she said, inserting the key into the almost invisible lock. The door opened, revealing a secret compartment, common in old churches for storing sacred objects. Inside, there was a large envelope and a metal box. Cardoso moved forward. Quickly, but Iris stepped in front. "First, you're going to promise me that you won't hurt my mom," she said firmly. "Girl, you're not in a position to make demands," said Cardoso, losing patience. "Yes, I am." Iris held the envelope to her chest. "Because if you hurt me here, in God's house, you'll have to explain to the entire city why you're threatening a blind child in a church. And I doubt that's good for your business." Harrison looked at the girl in admiration. At 6 years old, she already understood strategy and social pressure better than many adults. "All right," said Cardoso reluctantly. "Your mum won't be hurt. Now hand over the documents." Iris hesitated for a moment, then extended the envelope. Cardoso opened it quickly, but his expression changed as he saw the contents. "These are birth certificates? Marriage documents?" He looked confused. "Where are the evaluation certificates? The documents for the stones?" "Those documents aren't about stones," said Iris calmly. "They're about people." Harrison approached and saw over Cardoso's shoulder. There were several birth certificates, all with Minerva's name as the mother, but with different fathers listed. Marriage certificates too, some with overlapping dates. "Your mom has several fake documents," said the fat man, confused. "Why?" "Because her name isn't Minerva Santana," said Iris, "and because I'm not really her daughter." The silence that followed was absolute. Harrison felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice coming out hoarse. "Minerva, my mom. She found me when I was a baby." Iris spoke slowly, as if each word cost an immense effort. "My real parents died in an accident at the mine where Dad Rodrigo worked. She and Rodrigo adopted me, but never legalized it because they were on the run." Cardoso flipped through the documents frantically. "These certificates, some are for children who have disappeared over the years." "Children whose parents worked in the illegal mines," completed Iris. "Mom kept the documents to protect those children, so that one day they could discover who they really were." Harrison sat heavily on one of the church pews. "How many children?" 17, said Iris precisely. "Over 15 years. All daughters of workers who discovered things they shouldn't have and disappeared." The magnitude of what was being revealed began to impact Harrison. It wasn't just about illegal mining. It was about destroyed families, orphaned children, a network of corruption that claimed lives to keep secrets. "And you've known all this since when?" he asked. "Since forever," replied Iris. "Mom told me when I turned 5 years old. She said I needed to know the truth in case something happened to her." Cardoso had paled as he read the documents. This goes beyond the stones. If this information reaches the authorities, many important people will have to answer for many deaths," completed Iris. "That's why Mom never reported it. She was afraid they would kill us too." The fat man approached menacingly. "Then we'll have to make sure you never have the chance to report it." "You won't," said a new voice behind them. Everyone turned to see Minerva Santana standing at the entrance of the church. She was pale and clearly weak, but her eyes shone with determination. Beside her was Nurse Lourdes and a man in a suit that Harrison didn't recognize. "Mom!" Iris ran to her and Minerva hugged her carefully. "How are you here?" asked Harrison. "The surgery was postponed," said Minerva, "because I received very interesting visitors last night." She looked directly at Cardoso, "including District Attorney Silva here." The man in the suit introduced himself. "District Attorney Antonio Silva. We've been investigating irregularities in regional mining for 2 years. Minerva decided to cooperate with the justice system." Cardoso and his henchmen tried to move towards the exit, but found that police officers in plain clothes had already surrounded the church. "How?" asked Cardoso, incredulous. "Because Mom is much smarter than you thought," said Iris proudly. "She pretended to be cooperating with you yesterday, but she was actually recording everything." Minerva raised a small recorder. "Including the threats against my daughter and against Mr. Vanderbilt." As the police arrested Cardoso and his henchmen, the district attorney approached Harrison. "Mr. Vanderbilt, we need to talk about your outsourced company. But from the information we have, you seem to have been deceived as much as the families of the victims." Harrison nodded, still processing everything he had discovered. "I will cooperate completely." Minerva approached him, holding Iris by the hand. "Mr. Harrison, there's one last thing you need to know." "What?" "About who Iris really is." Minerva took a deep breath. "She is the daughter of Edward Vanderbilt, your younger brother." Harrison's world completely collapsed. Edward, the brother who had died 10 years ago in a mining accident. The brother he had never been able to forgive for working for competing companies. "Iris is my niece?" Your niece, confirmed Minerva, and during all these years I protected her without knowing that one day she would find her way back to the family. Iris let go of Minerva's hand and walked to Harrison. "Uncle Harrison," she said, her voice small and full of hope. Harrison knelt down and hugged her, tears that he hadn't shed in years finally falling freely. "Yes, Iris, I'm your uncle." But as he hugged her, a terrible realization hit him. If Iris was Edward's daughter, and Edward had died investigating illegal mining, then his own negligence had not only contributed to the tragedy, it had cost the life of his own brother. 6 months had passed since the revelations at St. Francis Church. Autumn had arrived in Savannah, painting the mountains with golden tones, that Iris described with a poetic precision that always surprised Harrison. She was sitting in the garden of the simple house he had bought, not the mansion he owned on the outskirts of the city, but a Victorian house in the historic centre, where Iris could walk independently through the streets she knew by heart. Minerva was in the kitchen, preparing Sunday lunch. The surgery had been successful, but the recovery was long and difficult. Harrison had sold most of his mining companies after the investigations revealed how deep the corruption was. With the remaining money, he had created a support fund for the families of the victims of the illegal network and funded a specialized school for visually impaired children. "Uncle Harrison," called Iris, interrupting his thoughts, "Mum Minerva said that today you're going to tell me about my real dad." Harrison closed the book he was reading, a manual on education for blind children that had become his new obsession. For months he had postponed this conversation, not knowing how to explain to a 6-year-old child the complexity of the mistakes he had made. "Yes," he said, sitting next to her on the garden bench. "Are you ready to listen?" "I've always been ready." "You weren't ready to tell." Iris's perception of the emotions of adults continued to impress him. In 6 months living together, she had become not only his beloved niece, but also his wisest advisor. "Your father, Edward, was my younger brother," began Harrison. 5 years younger than me. When we were kids, he always said he was going to be better than me at everything. And was he? Harrison smiled sadly. In many things, yes. He was braver, more honest, more human. I built my fortune being calculating and distrustful. He chose to be a geologist because he wanted to protect nature. Why did you fight? Iris's direct question caught him off guard. How do you know we fought? Because whenever you talk about him, your voice gets sad in a different way. It's not just longing, it's regret. Harrison took a deep breath. We fought because I found out he was working for a competing company. I thought it was betrayal, that he was trying to steal my trade secrets, but that wasn't it. No, he was investigating illegal activities involving outsourced companies that I had hired. He tried to warn me several times, but I was blinded by anger and pride. I said terrible things to him. Iris extended her small hand and found Harrison's. What kind of things? I said that he would never be anything in life, that he was jealous of my success, that I didn't want to see him ever again. The words came out loaded with a pain that he had carried for 10 years. The last thing I said to your father was that he was dead to me. The silence that followed was filled only by the sound of the wind in the leaves of the guava tree. And then? Then he died trying to gather evidence of what was happening. He died alone, in an abandoned mine, because I didn't want to listen to what he had to say. Harrison wiped his eyes, trying to control his emotion. If I had listened, if I had investigated my own companies, he would be alive, completed Iris softly. Yes, and you would have grown up with your real father, not blind, not going through hardships. Iris was quiet for long minutes, processing the information. When she finally spoke, Her voice was more mature than her 6 years suggested. "Uncle Harrison, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think Dad Edward would be mad at you today?" The question surprised him. "Why?" "Because you saved Mom Minerva, because you brought me home, because you helped all those other families." Iris turned her face in his direction. People who do bad things out of pride are different from people who do good things out of love. Harrison felt a lump in his throat. "How can you forgive so easily?" "I didn't forgive easily," said Iris. "I cried a lot when Mom Minerva told me the whole truth. I was angry at you, at the world, at God. But then I realized something." "What?" "That being angry wasn't going to bring Dad Edward back, but loving. You could give me the family I always wanted to have." At that moment, Minerva appeared in the kitchen door. "Lunch is ready," she said, but stopped when she saw the scene in the garden. "Are you okay?" "We're great, Mom," replied Iris, getting up and walking safely to her. "Uncle Harrison was telling me about Dad Edward." Minerva looked at Harrison with understanding. During these months, she had become not only Iris's adoptive mother, but also a close friend of Harrison. The shared suffering had created between them a bond that transcended the circumstances that united them. "And what did you think of the stories?" asked Minerva. "I thought Dad Edward was a lot like me," said Iris, "stubborn and brave." Harrison laughed, the first genuine laugh in months. Yes, he was exactly like that. During lunch, Iris asked a question that would change their lives once again. "Uncle Harrison, do you want to be my real dad?" He almost choked on his food. "What do you mean?" "I want you to adopt me officially, so that I'm really your daughter, not just your niece." Harrison looked at Minerva, who smiled encouragingly. "But I don't know how to be a dad," he said. "I've never had children." "You don't need to know," said Iris. "You just need to keep loving me like you have been, and teaching me about the pretty stones, and reading stories to me before bed. What if I make mistakes? If I can't give you everything you need?" "All parents make mistakes," said Minerva softly. "The important thing is to be willing to learn and to ask for forgiveness when necessary." Iris got up from her chair and walked to Harrison, her small hands finding his face. "Uncle Harrison, you saved my mom. You gave me a home. You taught me that being different doesn't mean being less." She smiled, that smile that lit up any room. "I think you already know how to be a dad." 6 months later, on the day the adoption was officialized, they returned to the abandoned backyard where it all had begun. The Victorian house had been restored and transformed into a community center for families of miners. In the garden, where Iris had desperately dug in the mud, now grew a sensory garden with aromatic plants and different textures for blind children to explore. "Dad Harrison," said Iris, using the title for the first time officially, "do you think Dad Edward would approve?" Harrison looked around, seeing the children playing in the garden, hearing the laughter that filled the space that was once just abandonment and solitude. "Yes," he said with certainty, "I think he would be very proud. Of me, of both of us." Iris smiled and took his hand. "Then let's go home. Mom Minerva said she's going to teach you how to make that cornmeal cake I like." As they walked through the cobblestone streets of Savannah, Harrison reflected on how his life had completely changed. He had lost his fortune, but gained a family. He had discovered the extent of his mistakes, but also found the chance for redemption. And most importantly, he had learned that sometimes the greatest riches are buried not in the ground, but in the hearts of the people we learn to love. Even when that love is born of pain, grows through forgiveness, and is strengthened in the courage to start over. That night, while reading a story to Iris before bed, she asked one last question. "Dad, do you think one day I'll be able to see?" "I don't know," he answered honestly. "But I know that you already see things that many people with perfect eyes never manage to see." "Like what?" "Like the love that unites a family, like the strength that is born of forgiveness, like the beauty that exists in the hearts of people. Iris smiled and snuggled into her pillow. Then I guess I already see everything I need to see. And at that moment, Harrison Vanderbilt, who for 52 years had been a rich man but poor in soul, finally understood the true meaning of wealth.